Hi, I'm Colin Sutherland, Executive Vice President for Geotab. And once again, thank you for Connected with Geotab, where I am interviewing executive guests on trending topics here at Geotab and also around the world. Our goal with this podcast series is to create a connected community where listeners can locate a variety of topics and ideas, really to deal with this fast-paced and business climate that we find ourselves in today and going forward. So today we are very lucky to have Mike Branch, our Vice President of Data Analytics at Geotab. And I want to welcome Mike to our Connected with Geotab podcast. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Colin. Pleasure to be here.
And Mike, one of the things, because you're into data and analytics, which I think, we call the DNA team inside Geotab, but maybe just take a step back and walk us into this idea of big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning, just kind of decrypt some of that for us so that as we get into our conversation, we sort of have some context around some of the terms and expressions that you'll be using.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it all connects around the IoT device, connects around big data, connects around machine learning and AI, and I'll kind of draw how all that comes together. So if you think about IoT, so Geotab has an IoT device, right? A telematics device stuck inside the vehicle, the commercial vehicle, anything ranging from, passenger car, as we know, all the way up to heavy duty Class 8 vehicles. And then we're getting a ton of this data popping into a big data ecosystem. And by this big data ecosystem, we mean an area where we can really store all of this data at scale, right? We're dealing with 2 million plus commercial vehicles at this point in time, 40 billion plus records per day. We need an area where we can store this data and query it. And by query, I mean ask it questions and have it respond to us very, very quickly, right? We use Google BigQuery for that. So that's the kind of storage component of it. That's where big data kind of comes to play. Now, you have to be able to do something with that big data. And to be able to do something with big data, oftentimes we're using artificial intelligence nowadays and machine learning. And so what we do is we have algorithms on top of big data that draw from all this massive lake of data that we have to be able to make predictions. And artificial intelligence is simply about one thing. It's making predictions, right? So what will the price of a stock be tomorrow? Will this vehicle, hit this pedestrian as we're going through a crosswalk? What's going to happen? It's making a prediction. And I think the interesting thing is that the cost of making these predictions has dropped drastically since artificial intelligence was first coined in the 1950s, to the point where it's very easy for us to make predictions right now. It's very, very cheap with a result of, all of the infrastructure that's gone on with IoT, with a lot of the big cloud vendors. The democratization of this has started to come down. So when we talk about doing artificial intelligence or machine learning, it comes into a few different areas. There's an area of machine learning that we call unsupervised learning. And unsupervised learning is all about clustering, right? It's about having all of that data and making sure that we can allow it to cluster itself. So if I'm looking at something like customer segmentation, I want to know my good customers versus my mediocre customers. It looks at all this data coming in, and then it figures out what that distribution needs to be. If I'm looking at another area of machine learning called supervised learning, that's where we have to give it examples, right? And a good example of that is if I'm looking at something like fraud detection in financial transactions, right? So I need to be able to tell the machine what was fraudulent, what wasn't. There's a whole bunch of other data that goes behind that, all the different transactions. But at the end of the day, I need what's called that label data, that truth data, so that it can learn. So we've got unsupervised, which is about clustering. We've got supervised, which is providing this label data. And then we've got different kinds of approaches to it. So deep learning is something that has really taken off in the last little while as a result of a lot of the work that Geoffrey Hinton and a whole bunch of really deep research scientists have done a lot of work on, and where the ability to execute on a lot of these algorithms in the cloud has really exacerbated over the last few years. So we use, there's all sorts of different applications for deep learning. Picture it like this, a network of neurons that get activated and fired. And we use it for things like image recognition, as we're looking at vehicle vocation patterns. So the movement of a vehicle in and around different cities, understanding, its pattern of behavior geographically versus the time of day. We use a convolutional neural network for that. And then there's another class of learning, which is really interesting. The final one I'll touch on is reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning, you don't need a lot of this label data to train on, which is why I think we're going to see more and more of that happening in the future. So picture something like a robotic arm. As a robot is moving a ball with this arm from one location to, say, a pedestal, we want to make sure that it's able to get from that location, wherever it happens to be, to pick up that ball and put it on that pedestal. What we're going to do is we're going to give it a reward. Reinforcement learning is based on reward. So the closer I get from to getting that ball from a surface to the pedestal, the higher reward, and the further, the lesser reward. So it's used a lot in video games, a lot in robotics nowadays. But picture turning any problem into a bit of a game, and you can see how this rewards-based approach is going to really take off. So those are kind of the four majors. There's a lot of sub areas and subcategories, but those are the four that I'd highlight on. We use it, on a daily basis here at Geotab to help us make predictions and insight from that massive data lake.
Mike, I think that when people often think about vehicle-related data that you might be referring to, they would assume that it's just anonymized GPS records where vehicles are. But of course, there's accelerometer data that is available from the device all the way through sensor data that we're collecting from the vehicle itself, seat belts and voltage and CAN codes, as well as GPS. Maybe you can sort of help me out with the idea of, is there one data set that you find is particularly more of interest or more used than others, or do you treat them all equally? Where do you find kind of the, oh my gosh, this is phenomenal data set that we never expected to see something from, and oh yeah, that's kind of cool that we've been there, done that?
Yeah, no, there have been. I think it's a good point to realize it's not just track and trace that we're dealing with. Certainly, the location of where something is has a huge play in most of the data sets that we push out. But for instance, we got to thinking, well, what other sensors are there that we can make use of? This was a couple years back, and we were looking at temperature at that point in time. And looking at the ambient air temperature from a vehicle. And well, how can we leverage and use that? Then we had a theory, okay, well, maybe we could use it to predict temperature at a very hyperlocal area down to 150 meters by 150 meters. And at that point in time, we weren't collecting it on too many vehicles. So I had a chat with our embedded team, started seeing that propagate on many more vehicles, going from, I think 10,000 initially to 100,000, and now we get on about 75% of our vehicles, and we're able to now plot out hyperlocally, what the temperature is at every single hour of the day, aggregated, of course, from multiple vehicles. And a couple interesting points came out of that. One was, we started seeing spikes in temperature in certain areas of New York. So it was showing, I think, temperatures of 20 degrees Celsius in February in New York. And I'm like, well, that's wrong. We'll just get rid of it completely. And then, the common kind of piece of advice I give to our data scientists is to always dive deep and look for those small nuances. And in this case, it's a good thing we didn't remove it, because what that was showcasing was an area where there was a covered parking garage, right? So all of a sudden, as a result of looking for temperature data, now you're seeing locations of covered parking garages and the like. And a similar thing just happened recently. We were looking for, as we're looking at better algorithms for accident detection and all this kind of thing, we've got a tow truck, like a data set that looks at when something's being towed, right? Then all of a sudden, that same movement of a vehicle being towed, though, is similar to actually looking at a vehicle that is being transported across a body of water. And a ferry trip, right? So as a result of looking for towing, you start looking and finding all these other interesting data sets that come out of it. And it's only through conversation that these things really pop up, right? So we do our daily stand-ups in 15 minutes. Everybody kind of gives a quick shot of what they're working on. And then you're able to start pulling these things out. And what we say, and what I encourage everybody to do, is if you found something interesting, don't let it get stuck in time, right? Create an operational pipeline so that we have a data set that's continually updated. The worst thing that we could do is do this amazing analysis, and it's stuck in one point of time. And which is what we did for a lot of the work we did in COVID, right? We made sure that it's continually updated, it's live, it's tangible, and that it's useful for people.
Let's talk about that for a sec. Well, I think the topic of big data it's very abstract to a lot of people. Even just the idea of 40 billion pieces of data, it's such an abstract number, and this idea of this huge amount of data. And as a result, I think it's also possible to just get these abstract results from it because it's not really applied to a practical fleet experience. So then COVID happened, right? So now we are in June 2020. So we're about 12 weeks in, almost, since March. And I think that the team had to become more laser focused on what data are we actually collecting that could be meaningful for fleet managers to be able to see how they're doing and what's going on. So maybe you could talk about really the COVID-19 experience for the data science team and what specific data points did they sort of focus in on, and why did they focus in on those data points?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we kind of started with one push. So I remember it was very, very clear. It was March 15th. My daughter was born on March 15th. I think the 17th is when things went into lockdown. So I remember that point in time very clearly. And the data science team really started with one simple question: what can we do to better help our customers? And we drove through questions and decisions from that perspective. We were also getting used to having to work from home, all of us, right? And we weren't all certainly used to that kind of new norm. And as a result, this kind of gave us, our whole team, something to really rally behind as well too. What can we do to really help here? And this is when we established our daily stand-up meetings. And what was great was that it was a function of the right building blocks that we had in place, right? So we had done a lot of work before this to be able to create these elements, these building blocks that allowed us to do some of this interesting insight, right? Looking at congestion in cities, and I'll get to a few of the other points. And it was having the right building blocks, the right people. We had our data science team, but we also had our marketing team. We had our data privacy team, and to allow us to come up with these insights very, very quickly. And then the right cadence too was every single day we were meeting for, these quick hotshot sessions, 15 minutes, and we're able to get and pull out some insight. And that helped us rally behind something. And we could see the progression from pushing out different blog posts, see what was of interest to people. And we really took a lens of looking at it from, okay, well, what can we do to help our customers understand where they sit, where they stand? If I'm in the freight and logistics industry, what's happening regionally across the United States in different sectors? If I'm in the food and bev industry, what's happening? So to get a real pulse on what is happening is what we kind of, the mind frame we started off from, because we felt that individually a business may know how it's faring, but in comparison to what's going on more broadly, we thought that that's where we could play the biggest help. And so we did that, and we started off with a few simple blog posts. Again, the goal was, team, create these building blocks in such a way where they're repeatedly updated. So every single post that you see out there from Geotab is continually updated, right? We've also made a huge point of making sure that data is made available on our Ignition platform as well too, so that everybody can make benefit of it, right? So whether I'm looking at a blog post on city congestion, which we saw some really interesting things there, or if I'm looking at the recovery of a certain country back to its normal state of operation, all that data is made available for partners and customers to leverage and use and bring into their own systems. So I mean, some interesting things that we saw. We looked at it from a very macro level perspective, right? On a country by country basis, what do I look like from a commercial transportation recovery perspective? And what we did is we baselined a lot of that activity based on the month prior. So we looked at February 1st through to March 14th. What does normal activity look like for a region and then across various industries? We picked about 12 industries we thought were quite pertinent. And then we baselined what that looked like after March 15th and through to now, I guess, June 1st, right? And you see you see that quite a bit of a dip, and then you start to see a little bit of a recovery in different areas. And it's really interesting to see by different industries how that does vary. So we looked at recovery. We looked at border trade as well too. So we looked at what does trade between the U.S. and Canada look like, right? What does trade between U.S. and Mexico look like? And that is measured by commercial activity across the borders. Interestingly, Canada and U.S. actually dipped quite a bit more than U.S. To Mexico. And we saw that very, very clearly in the data, to the point where U.S. to Mexico at this point is almost up to normal capacity, whereas Canada, U.S. still is around 85, 88% of normal commercial trade from what we were seeing. So I mean, a ton of different insight that I think best leveraged for helping customers benchmark themselves against their peers, against where the industry stands.
As a frequent flyer, I found the study that you did on airport traffic. I think you looked at cars parking at some of the major airports around, and just the lack of traffic into airports. I thought that personally just affected me because I don't fly as much now. I've been grounded for the last 2.5, 3 months.
Yeah, no, we saw that quite a bit, and it's really important for people to understand when they're looking at these metrics that the types of fleets we have vary so much, right? So we've got fleets that in transportation, logistics, rental car. And so what we did in the airport and port activity data set is we looked at the activity from our fleets to and from these areas. And obviously there was just a massive reduction to various airports. I think Las Vegas had it the worst of all when we were looking at it. And that obviously makes sense. But port activity actually was hit a bit in certain areas, but has since kind of leveled off a little bit and has been actually above normal in certain areas as well too, which is to me a good sign that we're having goods still kind of moving in and around the country. And but yeah, airport activity dropped quite considerably.
Before I get back, I wanted to remember to take you up on the Ignition platform, because you mentioned the Ignition platform and I don't want to forget it. But from a practical perspective, let's talk about fuel, because there are some things in the studies that I think that even fleet managers would find interesting about fueling up activity. I know that it's very common in the fleet world that a fleet manager might have a policy of fuel up your tank at 25% of fuel tank level, and you fill up the tank when things are really busy and people are driving 100 miles a day. It's possible that the tank even goes down to 10% before the driver fuels up. So tracking fueling up activity, I thought was a really interesting indication of overall fleet activity. And it was one of the data points that you were studying.
Yeah. So we tracked it, especially based on the class of vehicle as well too, right? So whether we're dealing with a light duty truck, medium duty, heavy duty, passenger car, bus, or MPV were the kind of main categories we looked at. And I don't think any surprises on the busing side. It was extremely low, right? So compared to normal fill-ups activity, and what we do is we look at vehicles and the rise in tank level at a specific fueling station. That's kind of how we track the percentage to normal fill-ups. So when I talk about busing, I'm talking about school transportation, right? That saw a massive dip, of course. But where we started to see a huge uptake was probably middle to end of April in the light duty and medium duty vehicles. And when you look at kind of the vocational patterns for that, there's a lot of delivery-based operations that are happening there. So we started to see a pickup in delivery. And what was interesting there as well too, as we looked at, there's another blog post about this one as well too, commercial delivery patterns. You start seeing a drop in the amount of time that you're stopped at a specific location. So if I'm, courier company or delivery company delivering to my home address, I'm spending 10 to 15% less time stopping there on average versus the norm. And a hypothesis that there might be that the social distancing has, certainly come into play. I can't have contact with anybody. There can be no signing. So it's faster maybe for me to get my delivery. So as a result, we're seeing a little bit more distance driving throughout the course of the day. So we're seeing fuel up certainly increased beyond, well beyond actually the norm for that kind of light medium duty pickup truck. Heavy duty vehicles have been pretty norm across the board. So we're talking freight and logistics have been pretty norm and consistent, which is a positive thing for me. If I'm seeing a positive trend with freight and logistics, I'm seeing a positive trend with manufacturing, which is food and bev and all this kind of thing. Those two numbers are healthy. I'm feeling pretty good, right? Supply chain seems to be moving well, which is what we see.
Let's talk about data access, because I know that you're, that's, and the role that Geotab plays. And it's been great that we've been able to publish blogs and have customers see some of the output, but you did mention the Ignition platform and enabling, companies to see this data and to consume data. So what are your thoughts on data consumption and maybe the role of the team to help people access this data?
I think data access is so crucially important. I've been on a number of panels, especially lately, and access to data consistently comes up. And I think what we need to ensure as good corporate citizens is that we're making data available and accessible to our customers and to the public where it can meet certain demands. Without access to a lot of this vehicular data, we simply wouldn't be able to chart paths to recovery and look at what's happening macro scale and help cities and our customers and politicians make these informed decisions. So I think data access is crucial, but it can't be simply just access. It has to be responsible access as well. As we're looking at access to data, even though something is made available at aggregate doesn't necessarily always mean anonymous, right? And in this age of data privacy, which is we're seeing more and more disparate legislation popping up, right, between the GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, and all of these different privacy legislations. We have to make sure that the data that we're providing is truly anonymous, is truly aggregated. So we have a really strong privacy and customer first approach here at Geotab. And we run things like motivated intruder attacks on data. So as I'm releasing a piece of an aggregate data set that I may think is aggregate, let's be confident that it is, right? So we'll have special members of our data science team investigate the data set and try to re-identify. And where we also take a role is we actually allow third parties to do those motivated intruder attacks as well. So it gives us that extra level of security. So I think data access is crucially important. We need to make sure that we've got a vehicle data accessibility index as well too, right? That looks at accessibility from various makes and models of vehicles and allows our fleet customers to choose the vehicles that are accessible so that they can make a lot of these downstream decisions. Because as you're building your data business up, you need to have access to this data. It needs to be made open. It needs to be made transparent in a responsible, private manner. So yeah, I think a ton more discussion. We'll see a lot of this raised in the future, certainly around privacy and accessibility.
So when you, essentially the Ignition platform, as I understand it, also is like a software development kit that enables qualified people to access this anonymous aggregate data and the data sets. So you publish some data sets and you're supporting people's access to it. Is that essentially, walk me through the Ignition platform as far as its APIs and what would qualify a person to even have access to technical qualifications that might a person need to access it?
Yeah, no, great questions. And so we started off this whole journey down the road of aggregate data with data.geotab.com, which is about 2 years ago now, when we first published some aggregate data sets there. And then what we found is that access to the data was fantastic, was great, but there were some stumbling blocks. People couldn't visualize, they couldn't use the data as readily as we had thought they might. You'd have to be a lot more technical to leverage and use the data. While certain organizations have capacity to do that, we want to allow quicker exploration of that data. So we launched Ignition back in January of this year, and there's a full UI and visualization engine built on top of that. So We've distilled the different data sets, aggregate data sets, into 4 different areas. Urban insight, location insight. So things like intersection insight. How often am I stopping at an intersection? Dangerous driving areas in cities. So there's urban infrastructure, there's weather, and there's location insights. And weather ranges from hyperlocal precipitation to from the windshield wiper activation through to temperature and barometric pressure. So we've got things like fuel station insights, service center insights. And then more recently, what we did with COVID, we added a 4th tier, which is COVID mobility impact. And there's about 10 different data sets under COVID mobility impact that track everything that I was talking about. Everything from border crossings to port traffic, airport traffic. And those are all in different data sets. And what you can do with those, we've given different sample queries in there. So you can go, if you want to look at cell coverage dark spots in the Appalachian Mountains, you click that query, it formulates it for you. So it's still for the technical people who want to actually go in and write SQL code, you can do that, no problem. For the people who don't have that expertise, just click the sample query, click visualize, and then you've got it brought up on this beautiful map to display. Actually, this week we'll be releasing features where you can save all of this stuff and you can go back to different queries. So we found the sample queries help people out quite a bit. So if you're looking at intersection insight, you might see that it's done for Toronto, but you just change a little parameter in the query, run it for Las Vegas, and then you're good to go. What people can also do, so that's great, allows you to explore the data a little bit, right? But you might want to take that data out and use it in your own system, in your own platform. So we grant service account access for that. And for Ignition in general, anybody across the globe has access to Ignition. If you're a Geotab customer, you have direct access to it with your MyGeotab credentials. If you are a member of the public, we have a gating process, and whereby you will be granted access as long as you're a known entity. And then we have this notion of service accounts, right? So a great example is when we were doing the COVID mobility impact work, we had a number of different blog postings that went up. Deloitte saw what we were doing and said, hey, I'd really like to incorporate that into our economic recovery model as an alternative index. So they said, hey, could we get access to the data? And yeah, we've got service accounts for that kind of thing. So set up a service account for them. And literally from the day the request was made to the day it was made live on the Deloitte economic recovery dashboard, 3 days. So they got access. We issued them a sample CSV so they could experiment with it. They got their service account access and started pulling in that data. And with a service account, you pull in the data on a timed basis. So you can pull it on a weekly basis, a daily basis, however you'd like. Pull it into your own ecosystem. And we want to see more people leveraging and using the data. We've seen, certainly since we've released a lot of the work on mobility impact for COVID, a huge spike in activity on Ignition, which is great to see people leveraging and using the data. And we've seen a number of different data sets rise in popularity. The most popular ones for COVID have been the commercial traffic analysis. So looking at state by state, region by region, what return to norm looks like. And then otherwise, fuel station fill-ups and hazardous driving areas are the other two that have been the most popular for people to look at.
Let's say I'm a small business that loves everything that you've just said. And I don't know if I have technical skills inside my company right now that even know how to write SQL queries or click on things. Although it sounds like you've done the work, the team's done the work to make it relatively as simple as possible to access the data. What would I do if I'm a small business person and I'm looking at my local city or town? Where do I start looking for maybe interns? What qualifications would I be asking for if I was posting a job online and looking for a person that might be able to help me out to write some of these queries? What would the basic qualifications look like? And do you have any advice for customers that might be trying to find some talented in-house staff?
Yeah. So, while we've got obviously a very large data science team, you can get started very, very small. And keep in mind, we started the team off, almost 5 years ago with about 5 people on the team. Have grown that quite considerably now. But you can get started with a single intern. Anybody who knows, I would say SQL is the biggest stepping point, right? And then Python, SQL and Python. If you know those two languages, you can get off the ground running pretty quickly. And the interesting thing about just knowing SQL is that companies like Google have made it easier for you to create machine learning models just using SQL. So they've got something called BQML, which is BigQuery Machine Learning, right? And so you can write simple predictive models just by knowing SQL, which I think is phenomenal. And it's a skill set that I think Python and R are taught a lot in data science courses. SQL isn't taught quite as much. So I would encourage more instruction on SQL, complex SQL, and how to do that. But yeah, you can get a great intern. We've got a ton of tremendous folks who just come out of university, and that might be mathematicians, computer scientists, computer engineers who have strong technical skills and could pull out this data very, very easily. So I think you can start off with one person. You can start off with an intern, and you can already reap the benefits. You can reap the benefits even from a descriptive analytics perspective, right? So just write a query that tells me something interesting. I don't even want to start with prediction. Just describe what's happening right now, and then we could move to prediction. So I think, yeah, definitely something that can be done with little to no data science overhead.
When you think of the next 1 to 5 years, and we're looking into businesses making strategic decisions based on data, and we're trying to think of between now and 6 months from now, or even 18 months from now, what are your insights that you would share as far as where should businesses start maybe investing, not only maybe in the interns, but investing on their internal knowledge? Remember that a lot of our customers are fleet managers who a lot of the words and a lot of this discussion might be out of their comfort zone, right? So how do we help people move their business into that strong, confident way of making decisions based on data, and understanding that when you do a query and you get results, you can trust the results of the query, right? So how do you sort of step into the next 6 months, going forward into the future, Mike? And how do we get started?
So I think definitely per my previous comment, you can start quite small. You don't have to have a rocket scientist start developing these queries for you and leveraging AI and machine learning techniques. I think there's been a lot of advancement in democratizing a lot of AI and a lot of models that can be leveraged and used. They may not be perfectly suited for your organization, but Amazon and Google have done a great job of providing these toolkits, making it easier for you to get the most out of your data. So I would say certainly making sure that you're partnering with a cloud vendor in your technology choice that has looked at helping to democratize that. And the big guys like your Amazons and your Microsofts and your Googles all make a heck of a lot of sense. And then, I think one of the biggest things that has been a huge challenge for data scientists, I talked about the different types of machine learning, earlier on in the conversation, unsupervised, supervised. A lot of the work that we try to do is supervised learning. So if I'm looking at something like predictive maintenance, I need to know when a battery failed, right? I need to know when a component failed. And the problem is, certainly at Geotab, we have a lot of really rich information, but we don't have a lot of that labeled data. And a lot of our customers are in a similar situation. They may have a lot of really great telematics data, but sourcing that labeled data to help make a prediction is oftentimes very, very challenging. And then it lengthens the time to market for different endeavors. So if you're looking at engaging on a predictive maintenance project, well, now all of a sudden you have to have this boatload of label data that tells you when something fails. So now you got to integrate with another system that you have in place in your organization. Where we've been seeing some leaps and bounds over the last little while in data science and machine learning is being able to, you still need that label data, but you don't need as much of it anymore. There's new techniques that are coming out which allow you to get better prediction with a much smaller degree of actual label data. So I think going down the road, we're going to definitely see a timeline shortened to market to get solutions out there so that we can get insight out into platforms like our MyGeotab platform that much quicker, right? And that makes sense as an individual a fleet owner, fleet operator. There's a mix of different things I'm going to want to use. I'm going to want access to the raw data, but I'm also going to want some insights generated from a MyGeotab. And I think it needs to be a mix of the two. So everything that we're doing, we're trying to build a Geotab, the data and analytics team, this layer of building blocks for people to build on top of. Our partners, our customers, our partners are gaining so much more acumen as well too. And I've seen that over the last few years, that our partners gaining acumen, and they can help you as well too. So it's not just Geotab that's gaining this acumen, it's the entire ecosystem. And I look at where data science was 5 years ago, where it is today. It was very difficult to find a data scientist 5 years ago. Education systems have caught up. Data scientists can be found quite easily right now, and they have the right level of skill. So I think what you're going to start seeing is that you're seeing an influx in the market of people who understand, who get data, and who can help you, whether that be Geotab, a partner, or somebody that you hire as an intern to get you going.
It's funny you say label data, and I was hoping you were going to go there. I remember 10 years ago, if I'm a customer of ours, and the only label I would have that would describe my building would be the postal address, the street address and the zip code. That's my building. But now there's so much more ways to, when you're describing that building now, there's a GeoCentral GPS point of the building. There's the shipping dock or the loading dock at the back. So I know internally we even had to clean up our own data because sometimes our shipping address system that we would use wasn't in sync with our accounting systems where you're bringing in data. So just normalizing all the data that you've got as a company and making sure all your business data is labeled same, right? And formatted the same, I think is probably a good
Absolutely, which bears to question, the whole idea of data governance, which is hugely important too, right? So understanding what your data is, what your data isn't. If you're sophisticated in your AI and machine learning endeavors, having a solid data governance platform that people can trust, they can rely on. And it shows the maturity of your data model as well too, because to your point before, you need to be able to run a query and rely on it. And without some of these structures in place, it can be difficult to do so. But it's a journey. I think there's been so much that has happened over the last few years. It's exciting to see what the next few years will certainly hold. I've seen it grow leaps and bounds. And I'm excited about what that means for Geotab and for our ecosystem and for our partners.
Mike, you've got young children at home. And I remember once I was at a conference and Google's AI person was speaking and somebody asked him, so you're convincing me that robots are going to run the world and machines are going to be making all the decisions for us. So you've got kids. What career path are you encouraging your children to pursue if machines take over the planet Earth? And his answer was poetry and writing music, by the way. But I wonder for yourself, when you sort of see the next 5 to 10 years and all the cool stuff that's going on in the world of data science, machine learning, and AI, what thoughts have you got for your own kids? What advice would you have to your own kids as they go through school, and what would they pursue? Of course, you want the best for your children, but just give me an idea.
Yeah, no, of course. And it's hard to say with a 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and a newborn. I'm not sure where their career paths line up right now. I would, of course, encourage them to follow their passions first and foremost, right? I think you can never go wrong when you follow your passions. But I sincerely do think that anything in the technical stream is going to be a solid choice. So I've encouraged them to, I've already got this, their little Botley robot that he can program and everything. He's, 4 years old. So he's putting out the cards and everything to learn how to kind of the basic constructs around programming without really knowing what programming is all about. But I sincerely think that, and because what will happen in a world of AI is you're going to get new jobs proliferate as well too. You're going to have all sorts of things around the ethics of AI, what can be done, what can't be done, all sorts of, while certain jobs may be replaced, there's going to be new jobs that are created, similar to what's happened in almost every kind of revolution that we've had. But I sincerely do think that anybody in that technical space, coding and software, to learn how to develop software and how to code, is I think will be crucial. And there may be certain things that get automated by AI, but those will be the commoditized type of thing. You have to learn creative thinking as well too. So it's that combination of technical and creative thinking. I think if you focus on those two things, the world's your oyster. So I hope I'm not wrong.
Maybe he wasn't too far off saying that his kids should get into poetry or writing and painting. I mean, the creativity part is absolutely essential. Mike, I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us again for another episode of Connected with Geotab. To stay up to date on fleet industry news, make sure you check out our blog post where you can find our COVID-19 blogs that, like we're saying, are updated all the time in real time, both for the world as well as for Mexico, USA, Canada. It's a phenomenal source. Also, check out our community website where you can ask questions of a community where crowdsourced answers will get you really where you need to go. So check out community.geotab.com. Check out our blogs. And once again, Mike, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate everything that you're doing and the team is doing out there. And look forward to seeing you soon, in person or over here.
Likewise, Colin. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Mike.